Due Process, winner of 19 regional Emmy Awards, including the 2010 New York Emmy for our coverage of voting rights and the 2011 Mid-Atlantic Emmy for Outstanding Discussion Series. Due Process is a presentation of Rutgers School of Law, Newark, and the Edward J. Blaustein School of Planning and Public Policy. Studio facilities provided by the Rutgers ITV Studio, Division of Continuing Studies.
Effective immediately, the Department of Homeland Security is taking steps to lift the shadow of deportation from these young people.
Young people like this Rutgers honors graduate, who has lived in that shadow for nearly all of her life. One of the many brought to this country as an infant by undocumented parents. The new Obama initiative will not replace the DREAM Act, which failed in Congress, but it will give young men and women the right to live and work legally, at least for now.
Thank you very much, everybody.
And what the president calls a stopgap measure as the struggle for the DREAM Act goes on. That story next on Due Process.
Major funding for Due Process provided by the Fund for New Jersey, supporting informed citizens for an effective democracy.
The DREAM Act. The last time we talked about it here on Due Process, it had just failed in Congress. Today, the prospects may be even more grim for a law that would have opened a path to citizenship to tens of thousands of undocumented young people raised and educated in this country. But for some of them, there is now some hope. I'm Raymond Brown.
And I'm Sandra King, and that new hope comes in the form of a White House initiative through Homeland Security. Not a permanent, long-term answer, not citizenship, not even a green card, but a way to legally work and drive, to emerge from the shadows, escape the constant threat of arrest and deportation.
So on this edition of Due Process, we see what the order means, where it misses. But first, to set the stage, a look back at Sandy's mini-doc on the DREAM Act and one young woman's struggle.
Education or deportation! Education or deportation! Education or deportation! Educación, no deportación! Educación, no deportación!
Education, not deportation. Not just a chant at a rally, but a matter of leading a normal life or not, for hundreds of thousands of young achievers whose American dream last year disappeared when the DREAM Act failed by 5 votes.
Once I am legal, oh my goodness, am I going to be working to make sure that justice is for everyone?
But the chance to be documented, to be legal, to live without fear of arrest, to be able to work.
You can't get a job, right? I mean, you can't even apply for a job at the local McDonald's.
Remains out of reach for Marisol Conde Hernandez and all of those like her.
And DREAM Act is just a stepping stone. There's going to be so much more that comes out of that.
But if it couldn't pass a lame duck Congress when both houses were in the Democrats' control, it has no chance now, at least for the next 2 years. So is it dead or just deferred?
Deferred. That's what I think. Because I'm an eternal optimist.
And so is Marisol.
School was my sanctuary. It's what I turned to. It was my hobby, as oddly as odd as that may sound. That was my escape.
Though when she graduates with honors from Rutgers this spring, she'll still have no chance at a driver's license, a social security number, or any kind of legal employment, and not because of any choice of her own.
My family came to the U.S. in 1988, or at least I did. I was a year old.
In fact, New Jersey's the only home she's known. Her whole life, all her schooling, right here.
I don't imagine my life anywhere but in New Jersey. It's the only place I want to be, really the only place I've been.
She knows nothing of Mexico or the border that her parents crossed to try to find a better life.
And why should we punish these kids? Because their parents might have broken the law. Why should we? I don't think that makes any sense.
And that's the question that the DREAM Act has posed for the last decade. But it wasn't until the last lame duck session that it finally seemed to have a chance.
As the son of somebody who did stand in line, I think there ought to be serious questions every time you look at a policy that allows some people essentially to skip the line and then potentially get sort of a fast-tracked citizenship.
We strongly supported it as an opportunity for young people who were raised in the United States to leave this very frustrating, marginalized, undocumented status that they're in, to actually be able to come out of the shadows and become lawful residents in the United States.
Still, just the fight for the DREAM Act brought some of those young people out of the shadows without papers or protection.
Talking about my story is a central tenet of my activism, is coming out as an undocumented student, and a very aggressive, high-achieving one, to put a face to the issue.
We need to speak out.
It just tears your heart out to see the bravery, you know, somebody like Marisol. It's heartwarming for me, you know, having seen the kids march from Florida to Washington, the sit-ins outside their members of Congress's office, their willingness to be in the media, and the response in some of those cases where some of those kids were actually picked up and arrested.
So it's no surprise that most see no choice but to stay in the shadows, like this high school senior brought from West Africa by his parents at just 7 years old.
I don't talk to nobody about it unless it's in my family, because I don't want nobody looking at me different. It's causing a lot of problems, causing me a lot of pain, because knowing that after high school, I don't know what I'm gonna do with myself.
He too has gone from counting on the DREAM Act
Changed my life a whole lot.
to fear of deportation.
If they deport me back, I don't know where I'm gonna go, because my mother's here, my father's here, have little siblings. I don't know what I would do if I go back, where I would stay.
These are kids that really want an education. They want to contribute back into the society. This helps us. When people get an education, when they get health care, they're less cost to the society. Come on, we got to take a look at the facts.
On the other side, that again, people who raise serious questions about the policies and the costs are labeled as xenophobes and anti-immigrant. But I think all of that reflects a frustration with the apparent inability of the federal government to kind of address the problem globally.
It's a travesty, a grave error of judgment, and a threat to any progress the Obama administration was making to show that they cared about the concerns of undocumented immigrants.
It can't be fixed overnight. And it's not just Mexicans, it's Filipinos, it's Indians, it's Chinese, it's Africans, it's even Eastern and Western Europeans. It takes a long time, you know, and I've embraced the struggle. You know, I'm ready for this fight. The DREAM Act isn't dead.
And Marisol, now a Rutgers graduate with honors, is here in the studio to talk about how the Obama initiative will change her life and why she continues to fight for the DREAM Act. We also welcome two distinguished academics on opposite sides of the immigration debate, the DREAM Act and the new Obama order.
Once the John Olin Professor of Humanities at NYU and a major social critic on the conservative side, Herb London has run for mayor of New York City and governor of New York State, writes and lectures extensively, and serves as both a senior fellow at the Manhattan Institute and president emeritus at the Hudson Institute.
An important voice from the other side is director of Seton Hall Law School's Center for Social Justice. Lori Nessel is a former Fulbright scholar who has published extensively and taught immigration. She's also been a longtime advocate for the undocumented. And Marisol, I have to start with you. You fought for the DREAM Act because you said it would change your life. Does this order change your life?
It has a potential to change my life a little bit, but I'm very skeptic of this administration because what they announce in terms of policy, or let's say the supposed exercise of prosecutorial discretion, has not really been upheld. What has been said has not actually been done. So
What's just been said, it's about to be done, you're already skeptical?
Yes, absolutely. Like I said, there is optimism. If all works well, then yes, I may have a work authorization permit. And yes, I may be able to get a new, yes, but no, I still won't have a green card. I still won't be able to adjust my status. I still won't be eligible for citizenship unless there is something done legislatively.
Lori, let's talk a little bit about what the order on its terms would provide. It guides discretion, 16 to 30, high school degree, no prior criminal record. What it doesn't do is promise that that discretion will be exercised in favor of the applicant, and it doesn't promise a job. Have I left out anything significant?
No, I mean, that's exactly right. And I completely understand Marisol's ambivalence. But I think from where I sit, it's a very positive step. It's much needed, and I think that what President Obama was trying to do was to do this as an initial step, but certainly the DREAM Act is still very much needed, now more than ever. So it's not enough. It doesn't create a pathway to citizenship. It doesn't create permanent residency. It doesn't, it's not necessarily, even if it's granted in the exercise of discretion, it'll be for 2 years, and then it may or may not.
And one other question. I'm trying to make this a legal, not a political question. It was announced in the year of a presidential election. If President Obama is defeated, in theory, does that provide carte blanche to the victor to essentially roll this back by another order?
Well, that's why I think it's certainly insufficient to provide any sort of permanent protection. Yes, I think that is a real risk that with a new president, if that happens, this is discretion. There's always been discretion that the president and the executive branch can exercise over immigration policy. In a new administration, yes, this could be rescinded. It doesn't have to continue beyond the initial 2-year period.
Herb, I assume you're looking forward to a different administration. And would you counsel the rollback of this order?
Well, let me explain this in somewhat different terms. Every nation in the globe has the right to determine its own sovereignty. Sovereignty is determined by maintenance of your own borders. If you can't maintain those borders, the state doesn't exist. So in fact, when people talk about justice, which is a rather ambiguous term, there is no justice. There's no due process if you cannot maintain sovereignty.
But how
so let's start with that assumption.
Okay, but let me ask you, how do you resist a story
you cannot resist
like
it.
Marisol's?
You cannot. I cannot resist it. I am very taken by the humanitarian dimensions of what she's described. And there are ways around it. Community service, military service might very well lead to citizenship of some kind. And in fact, Republicans have talked about that. So it's not as if this is impossible. But the fact of the matter is, you cannot open the door and simply say, we are now going to provide opportunities for anyone to enter the United States and become a member of this community. It's impossible. If that were true,
but these are
the United
kids who
States would be
entered the
overrun.
United States
I understand.
through no wish of their own, with parents when they were small children. They are Americans and everything but the law.
That's why I said special provisions should be taken with this particular population, which may include community service and military service. Someone joins the military and is actively involved in military service, it seems to me that person might very well be eligible for citizenship. But I'm raising a different question with you, and that is the question of where do we draw the lines and under what circumstances? Suppose you're 21 years old, you live in Mexico, and you're on the queue trying to get into the United States. You've gone to your embassy, you've asked for permission to enter, and they say, you got to wait 1.5 years, 2 years. You might simply say, why don't I cross over into Arizona or Texas, and I'm going to gain citizenship immediately.
No, because that's a very different circumstance than what this order or the DREAM Act allowed for.
I understand. But we're talking about how this all started in the first place. It was obviously people who came here with the understanding that if you set foot in the United States, you're going to be given special privileges. And indeed, you do get them. There are medical privileges, social service privileges that are given to people who went to this
Marisol
country.
is shaking her head. Why?
What kind of medical privileges? Every time I have to go to the ER, I have to pay several thousands of dollars out of my own pocket. Charity care doesn't cover me. I suppose they make too much money.
There is not an American citizen denied medical care in this country who enters a public hospital anywhere in the United States. That is the law of the land.
Absolutely. You still get treatment. Absolutely, I've never been denied any services, despite the fact that I'm not a citizen, but I still have to pay for it. And yet, who's complaining about the over $7 to $10 billion that are received by IRS, by people who are paying taxes that come from the unauthorized?
All right, let me take you back to what seems to me to be an internal contradiction in this order, and even if carried over, would be a problem to be solved. A large segment of this population, which we've called undocumented, even that is not a great term, but it's better than illegal, in order to survive, has had to have social security numbers, driver's license, and other things that are, quite frankly, fraudulent. So much of this population, which is otherwise, as described in the order, a model population, that's the kind of people we want, educated people who've stayed out of the clutches of the law, in that one area, in order to survive, have had to commit offenses. It seems to me, if you're talking about the exercise of discretion, how do you effectively exercise discretion except by turning a blind eye to that which is, in theory, prohibited, or by issuing some further order that says we're going to grandmother or grandfather in people who in that limited realm had to do that to survive? I mean, how is that issue going to be addressed now, and how might it be if this plays out in a way that the maximum way this order can work?
Yeah, I think that's very important. And I think that's why it's good that there's been a period from when President Obama made the announcement until the process is clear, so that there's time to think about it. Because it will be a big task figuring out how you determine if people are of good moral character, what the, as you said, people will be excluded if they've committed crimes. What types of crimes, what types of misdemeanors will be considered. And there'll need to be a process to figure that out.
You have a sense that they may guide their discretion by excluding misdemeanors, minor offenses that were committed just to survive, like having a false Social Security number or something.
Well, I would hope that something like that wouldn't be a basis for exclusion.
Because without that, they're building a contradiction factually into the order.
Right, and I think that's always the issue when you're talking about the undocumented population, as you point out, is that there's this real conflict between, yes, under our laws, they're not supposed to be here, but in every other sense, I mean, they're members of our community. The kids go to school with American kids, the parents work, they're involved in the fabric of society, and this, whether the DREAM Act or President Obama's deferred action policy, targets a particular group within that bigger set of the undocumented population, which are the children, who are probably the most sympathetic, as you mentioned.
Exactly, exactly. And because of that, Herb, are you uncomfortable taking the position that even these kids who really are here, as the president said, through no fault or responsibility of their own, uncomfortable at all about saying,
well, I already indicated that there's a humanitarian
special
dimension to this that cannot be overlooked. I recognize the fact that these are people who lived in the United States, worked in the United States. So, I mean, I'm not insensitive to that question.
And do you think
I'm trying to raise a different issue with you.
But do you think a Romney administration would come up with something that really serves this population in a meaningful way toward
I already gave you
residency?
two illustrations. I think community service, military service are ways in which you might very well create a pathway to citizenship.
Because the governor, of course, hasn't been specific yet about what he would do.
Keep in mind that Obama hasn't been specific about the next steps either. So there's been a great degree of ambiguity about immigration policy.
Except to say that he wants the DREAM Act. He's been very specific about that.
Well, let me posit an Obama win and a Republican Congress. Based on the recent past, would you see any likelihood of some comprehensive legislation? Because I take it that's part of the response of the resolution.
Again, if you have a House and a Senate that are controlled by the Republicans, I think you have a stalemate. I don't think very much will happen. And it would be through executive order that some changes might very well occur. Again, it's very difficult to know how things will shake out, and also what the policy of the Romney administration might be. Again, I think you're drawing certain conclusions about Romney that I think are unjustified, because we don't know what the policy position will be.
But that in and of itself is significant when you have an order that has some ambiguity about it, and which creates all kinds of problems, and you choose not to say, I would extend it. That's a position.
You know, one of the things that's interesting about politics at this point, no, but I mean, let me make a general point, if I may.
Okay.
You know, it was Emerson who said that consistency is the hobgoblin of fools. And there's some inconsistency in this. You're looking at undocumented people in the United States who look and act and quack as Americans. And so you want to be somewhat sensitive to the position. On the other hand, if this is the thin edge of the wedge, and you're changing the nature of sovereignty, and you're creating an opportunity for people to come into the United States as undocumented.
Are you seriously arguing that to take a fixed population that's been here since infancy through no fault of its own, that we can pretty much identify, and to admit them even as citizens, that changes or somehow dilutes American sovereignty?
Well, it might, because you have to keep in mind every kind of incentive that you provide for people to come here illegally is something that we have to look at very carefully. I mean, why? Do you think that the members of the Republican Party sitting in the Congress who've been opposed to this are insensitive, lacking in humanitarian views? It's absurd. The issue for them is always, how do we protect the sovereignty of this country? And what kind of incentives or disincentives do we provide?
Lori, let me ask you to answer that question.
Thank you. I think that it's important to look historically, even just looking at the Obama administration. I think the Obama administration has really focused on enforcement. The Obama administration has record high deportations, has really focused its resources up until now, until recently, on enforcement. I think immigration.
And I'm sure it's just a coincidence that there's an election coming up and a Hispanic voting bloc.
But I think immigration law and policy does, as Dr. London says, embody tensions. On the one hand, we want to be a welcoming nation. On the other hand, there are these concerns with sovereignty. And there's a question of figuring out the balance. I think, as you point out, this in particular is focused on a population within the undocumented population. It's focused on young adults, children who came here through no choice of their own. I think it's very significant that President Obama made the announcement on the 30-year anniversary of the Supreme Court decision in Plyler versus Doe, in which the Supreme Court said that you can't take away the right to an education, to a free public education, and that what we don't want to do is create an underclass of illiterate children that live in the shadows. And so this is a first step towards what we need to do, and I think we do need broader, comprehensive immigration reform. And this is focused on people who are here, people who are worthy, and I think it would benefit America overall to bring people out of the shadows and let them contribute, not just to go into the military, because that concerns me. Part of the DREAM Act has always been that one thing that people could do to qualify if the DREAM Act were to pass over these past 10 years is go into the military. But that's not the only way, certainly, that people can contribute to American society, Marisol being a wonderful example.
Let me ask you a question. Among the people that you talk to who are in this population, do they see this as an opportunity or a high risk? That is, you expose yourself in a circumstance that's full of uncertainties, the order, the elections. What is the sense, and maybe it's hard to generalize, but whether this is seen as an opportunity or an awfully high-risk situation?
It has been seen as both, really. Our organization has done community forums this past month, one every week. We've been in Newark. We were in New Brunswick just last week. And I've gotten very mixed reactions from youth who would otherwise not reveal themselves as undocumented, but have, stepped up to me, who's been very public for the past 7 years about her status, and said, well, I'm optimistic, but I'm also quite afraid. I'm not sure what any of this means. For those who have any encounters with an enforcement officer, whether it be a police officer or someone in their family has been deported, they're terrified because they're not quite so sure as to what it all means. Others are excited to quit their job at McDonald's and start applying for quote unquote real jobs. So it's been interpreted in very different ways, and I think it also varies on the age. I've seen a correlation between the age for the person who's undocumented, how long they've been here, with their reaction.
How does that work? Older?
Those of us who are a little on the older side, mid-20s to late 20s, who've been very aware about our undocumented status and have been working and out of school, I think we're a little bit more optimistic, whereas the younger ones who are still in high school or just out of high school and have not found a way into college yet because they can't afford it, tend to be very skeptic and uncertain because they haven't been exposed to a movement, they haven't been exposed to the resources or the connections that myself or somebody older
We have only 1 minute remaining. So sorry. If I can ask you each, though, to reflect, starting with Herb, on where we're going, not just on the question of the DREAM Act, not just on the question of kids like Marisol, but on this whole question of immigration that we do seem to be deadlocked on.
Well, look, I think there are some things that can be done. There is no question that we invite students to come to the United States. They end up with PhDs at Caltech and MIT, and they're obliged to go back to the country of origin. That doesn't make any sense to me at all. It's also true that the Republicans have been in the forefront of a lot of liberalization when it came to immigration policy. You look at the McCain-sponsored bills during the
We're running out of time, Herb. Let me ask you to make that
the president, well, George W. Came up with a proposal that made a lot of sense.
Marisol, I've got about 5 seconds.
I think that moving forward, we just need to keep in mind, especially towards the younger youth, is that this is a minute step forward, but there is a lot of work that needs to be done.
Justice Kennedy, writing for the majority in the recent U.S. Supreme Court case involving Arizona, said, "Our immigration policy will determine our destiny as a nation."
And that's where we're going to have to leave it. Though the conversation will continue through the presidential election and well beyond. It's one of those issues that just won't go away, and one that we'll revisit here on Due Process.
In the meantime, we're here every week with cutting-edge questions of law and justice. We hope you'll join us on air and online for the kind of programs that have won us 19 Emmys over 17 years. For Sandy, our associate producer, Tanya Ivanova, and all of us here at Due Process, I'm Raymond Brown. Thanks for watching.
Say this. I hope that the United States can prove itself to be different, to be righteous, and to stand for the morals that we say we stand by. It's such an irony that we have the Statue of Liberty and we don't uphold those virtues and those values. I know the DREAM Act will pass, but it doesn't stop there. Once I am legal, oh my goodness, am I going to be working to make sure that justice is for everyone? Not just my parents, other undocumented immigrants, it's for everyone. For everyone.
Want even more insight on law and justice? Become a fan of Due Process on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, and watch us on demand on YouTube.